In 1990, Frank Sikora, a noted civil rights historian and a writer for the Birmingham News, dedicated a column to Cynthia Vodovoz, a then 28-year-old woman, and her bizarre story of UFOs and alien abduction. Sikora spoke to Vodovoz by telephone, a lengthy interview in which she described in detail the events that befell her and her mother one chilly night in October 1973. For many years I didn't know what had happened, only that I had been troubled by something, she told Sikora. At the time, Cynthia was only 12 years old. She and her mother had just left their home in Morris and were heading to a dance class in Birmingham. It was dark out at this point. They were driving along US 31 near Gardendale when Cynthia looked out the window of the car and observed something peculiar in the night sky. She described it as, quote, big and round and bright green. There was also a yellow ring around it. She could see it coming over the trees, and it stayed alongside them as they moved down the road. It was concerning enough that Cynthia's mother asked, "Is it going to land?" They were now just north of Gardendale when the object began to descend directly in front of them. To their horror, the car they were driving in suddenly stalled as it neared an intersection. Cynthia looked around and noticed that several other cars had also stopped. The object kept coming down and seemed to stop near the wires. It seemed bigger than a plane. My mother rolled down the window, which really upset me. I thought I was going to run. In the car next to me was a man whose face was lit up. He was leaning over toward us. Mother asked the man, "Do you think it's a UFO?" And he said, "I guess so." Cynthia next recalled that she began to feel heavy. At the same moment, a bright light shone into their car. She was now unable to move, apparently paralyzed by something. That's it. That's her last memory. The very next thing she could recall was sitting in the car, her feet in her mother's lap. The car door slammed on her back, which seemed to wake both Cynthia and her mother up at the same time. Cynthia looked over as her mother frantically attempted to start the car. They carried on moving down US 31, eventually arriving at the dance class. They were some 40 minutes late. A little disturbed by what had happened, Cynthia's mother called her father, Irvin Vodovoz, who worked with the Federal Aviation Administration in Birmingham. He immediately dismissed the object as a rocket being test-fired by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The following year, the family moved to Washington. Later, Cynthia moved to Los Angeles to pursue her interest in dance, but she was bothered by the incident in Gardendale. She simply could not let it go, and in 1986, she met with Dr. Richard Neal, an obstetrician-gynecologist who also worked as a hypnotist. Given the nature of her abduction, Bud Hopkins, a noted ufologist who was at the forefront of abduction research, also took an interest and assisted with the case. During her sessions, Cynthia slowly began to fill in the details of what happened that night near Gardendale, the night she and her mother blacked out after seeing a UFO. The story she would tell would be absolutely astonishing. Upon being hypnotized, Cynthia was brought back to that night. She recalled being inside the car, looking up at the object. She then noticed that as they approached the intersection, she could see numerous cars stopped. She initially assumed that there had been an accident, which was why, she thought, so many cars were just sitting there not moving. It was like mayhem, as people in the cars ahead of them were screaming and putting their arms out the window. She could make out that something tall, thin, and apparently humanoid was walking down the road in between the cars. As the figure passed by the cars, the people inside seemed to become subdued, as if placed in a trance. As the strange figure drew closer to Cynthia's car, she looked over and saw her mother rest her head on the door as if falling asleep. This is when Cynthia claims that 3 small, whitish-looking beings came up to her door and opened it. They reached inside to grab her. Terrified, Cynthia attempted to hold on to the air conditioner vents, but they broke as she was pulled out. She next recalled being floated into the object. The interior of the craft was bright white. She was placed onto a table inside a room. She could see that there was another young girl laying on a separate table. She had kind of sandy curly hair, and she was in the same predicament as me, Cynthia told Sakura. She could see the beings walking around the table, performing some kind of examination. At some point, the beings inserted a needle into Cynthia's navel. Sometime after this, Cynthia claims that she was placed into what she could only describe as a transparent globe, and then floated back into her mother's car. Upon getting placed inside the vehicle, the door of the car was slammed on her back. This is the moment that she and her mother seemed to awaken from their trance-like state. Apparently, the object was now gone, and the cars around them began rumbling to life, as if everyone had come out of it at the same time. Cynthia, her mother, and the others carried on with what they were doing, seemingly having no memory of what had happened. I've always wondered whether anyone else remembers anything happening there that night, near Gardendale, she told Sakura. She added that sometime after her sighting, her father had received a call from a man who said he was an Air Force colonel, who told him that he had seen a UFO. The father had not been able to track him down. Jeff Ballard, then the state director of the Mutual UFO Network, was hoping that by Cynthia coming forward with her story to the press, they might be able to track down other people who might have been on US 31 that night in October 1973. It is unclear if anyone ever did come forward, as I could find no follow-up. 1973 was a big year for ufologists and paranormal enthusiasts. It has been nicknamed the year of the humanoids due to the sheer number of alien encounter cases that were logged. There was even a book written about it. That year also saw an uptick in Bigfoot reports, haunted house cases, poltergeist activity, weird creature sightings, and MIBs were everywhere. It was a wild year. Cynthia's case, even without the added abduction aspect, is extraordinary as it highlights the sheer boldness of the visitors, that they were willing to make themselves known in order to take 2 girls. This runs contrary to the vast majority of cases in which the visitors make every effort to stay hidden. What was it about Cynthia and the other girl that so interested these beings that they were willing to literally stop traffic to take them? Why go to all the trouble to follow them, stall the cars, place the drivers into a trance-like state, all just to snatch a couple of young girls for a round of examinations? It's baffling. On the evening of January 21st, 1977, Air Flight 132 rolled down the runway at El Dorado Airport in Bogota, Colombia, and was lifting skyward within a matter of seconds. As Captain Gustavo Ferreira eased off on the throttles of his Boeing 727 jet, he could see the lights of Bogota below and to his left. He retracted the leading edge flaps, and his aircraft responded, smoothly climbing to 20,000 feet. Directly ahead of him, the pitch-black night sky was dusted with brilliant stars, and the night was calm. It was expected to be a smooth and routine flight to Pereira, and his eyes expertly scanned the cluster of instruments in front of him. Little did he know that far off in the distance, an uninvited guest would soon make its appearance known. As he looked out the cockpit window, he spotted an extremely bright light in the distance, which seemed to be on a collision course with his aircraft. Unknown to him at that precise moment, 4 miles below, a veteran air traffic controller was tracking the same thing. George J. Jimenez, the controller, could not understand what he was seeing initially. There was the familiar blip of Flight 132 easing its way across his screen on course, when suddenly he noticed a blip 3 times the size of the airliner zigzagging all over the screen at speeds in excess of 20,000 miles per hour. Back in the sky over Colombia, it was now 9 p.m. local time when Captain Ferreira caught sight of the strange object. His immediate reaction was to alert the other members of his cockpit crew and verify the sighting. Everyone on board saw the same thing. At that point, the co-pilot, Pedro Tapayas, radioed Bogota Control Center to advise them that something was on a collision course with their plane. Bogota Control replied that although they could not identify any aircraft in that area, they were indeed tracking a huge object zigzagging at a tremendous rate of speed. They asked the crew for a description. The crew radioed back, "We are seeing a very brilliant white light. At times it is stationary, and at other times it is moving." At that precise moment, Captain Ferreira switched on his landing lights, and the mysterious object changed to a bright red. The captain then decided to switch off his lights, and then turn them on again, and the UFO this time flashed back with green lights, as if acknowledging the pilot's signal. After this brief exchange, Ferreira and the object signaling to each other, the UFO, or its pilot, seemingly understood. It immediately made an effort to get out of the Boeing's way, turning and speeding off towards the south, where it eventually disappeared from view. The radar observer confirmed that the huge blip had suddenly executed a 90-degree turn and sped off the scope. When Captain Ferreira was interviewed by the press, he explained that in all of his 22 years of flying, he had never seen anything like it, and that although he had always doubted the existence of UFOs, he could no longer deny their reality. Regardless of where you come down on the UFO debate, something very real happened on that night. The cockpit crew, including 2 stewardesses and most of the passengers, did indeed see something and were willing to attest to that fact. The object was also seen by ground crew and was witnessed by professionals on radar. Unless all the people involved had previously arranged to perpetrate a hoax, which is highly unlikely, the Ferreira case should go down as one of the best UFO pilot encounter cases on record.